There comes a quiet turning point in a life well lived, a moment that does not knock loudly but settles gently into your spirit and whispers, "Now you see." By the time you reach 45, you have walked through enough storms to recognize the difference between noise and truth, between those who clap for you and those who stand with you when the music fades. You begin to understand that life was never meant to be rushed or proven, but felt deeply, carried with grace, and honored with courage. And in that understanding, something shifts within you. No longer are you chasing the world, but finally, you are choosing yourself. There was a time when every goodbye felt like a wound that refused to close, when every departure echoed in your chest like something stolen rather than something released. You counted losses as if they were failures, as if the leaving of others was a reflection of your worth. You held on too tightly, trying to rewrite endings that had already made up their minds. But life, in its quiet wisdom, was not taking from you. It was clearing a path you could not yet see. With years comes a different kind of sight, the kind that does not live in the eyes, but in the spirit. By 45, you begin to understand that not everyone who walks away was meant to stay, and not every absence is an emptiness. Some people were only meant to pass through your story, to teach you a lesson your soul needed, and then step aside so you could grow into the person you were always becoming. Their leaving was not abandonment, it was alignment. You start to recognize how some exits carried a strange kind of mercy, the friendships that drained your light, the love that asked you to become smaller, the connections that demanded your silence. They did not break you when they ended, they freed you. What once felt like rejection begins to reveal itself as protection, a quiet hand guiding you away from what could not honor your truth. And suddenly you see that holding on would have cost you far more than letting go ever did. There is a strength that grows in releasing what no longer belongs to you, not the loud kind that proves itself to the world, but the gentle, steady kind that knows when to open its hands and let life move as it must. You stop chasing explanations, stop asking why someone could not stay, and instead begin to ask what their leaving has made room for. In that space, something sacred begins to rise, self-respect, clarity, and a deeper peace than you have ever known. And so, you no longer grieve every goodbye in the same way. You learn to bless what was, to honor what it taught you, and to trust that what remains is exactly what is meant to walk beside you. By this age, you understand that life is not measured by who stays forever, but by what stays true within you. And in that understanding, you find a freedom so profound it changes everything. You are no longer afraid of endings because you finally know that some of them were never losses at all. There was a season in your life when you believed time was an endless river, always flowing, always returning, always willing to wait for you. You spent it freely, sometimes carelessly, offering hours to people who only valued your presence when it was convenient, giving your days to things that left your spirit empty by nightfall. You told yourself there would always be more time to rest, to dream, to become. But time, quiet and unassuming, was teaching you something you could not yet hear. By the time you reach 45, you begin to feel time differently. It is no longer something abstract or distant. It becomes intimate, almost sacred. You notice how quickly a year can pass, how moments once taken for granted now carry a weight you cannot ignore. You start to understand that time does not return what is spent, and it does not pause while you hesitate. And in that realization, something within you shifts. You become more deliberate, more aware, more protective of the hours you are given. You begin to measure your life not by how busy you are, but by how fulfilled you feel. The crowded rooms lose their appeal if your heart feels alone within them. The endless obligations begin to look less like responsibility and more like distraction. You start choosing differently, choosing conversations that feed your soul, work that aligns with your purpose, and moments of stillness that allow you to hear yourself think. You no longer trade your time for things that do not give something meaningful in return. There is a quiet courage in saying no, in stepping away, in refusing to pour yourself into places that leave you drained. It is not selfishness as you once feared, it is wisdom. You come to understand that every hour you give away is a piece of your life you will never reclaim, and so you begin to guard it, not with fear, but with intention. You offer your time to those who value it, to passions that ignite something within you, to rest that restores rather than escapes. And somewhere along this path you discover that time, unlike money, cannot be earned back once it is gone. No amount of success can buy a single moment you failed to live fully. No apology can return the years spent neglecting yourself. But this truth does not burden you, it frees you. It reminds you to be present, to cherish the ordinary, to recognize that even the smallest moments hold a kind of richness that cannot be replaced. By this age, you no longer rush through your days as if they are something to get through. You begin to live them as something to honor. You understand that a well-lived life is not built on how much you accumulate, but on how deeply you experience what you have. And in that understanding, you find a new kind of wealth, one that is not counted in numbers, but in moments that truly matter. There was a time when fear spoke so loudly within you that it shaped the way you walked into every room. It adjusted your voice, softened your opinions, and convinced you that being accepted was more important than being authentic. You learned to make yourself smaller, more agreeable, more convenient for others, believing that comfort for them would somehow create belonging for you. But deep inside, there was always a quiet unrest, a sense that you were slowly disappearing in places where you were meant to be fully seen. As the years unfold, something within you begins to awaken. A voice that had long been silenced starts to rise with quiet determination. By the time you reach 45, that voice no longer asks for permission. It does not tremble the way it once did. It carries the weight of every moment you swallowed your truth, every time you chose peace outside over peace within. And now, it speaks with clarity. You were never meant to live a life edited for the comfort of others. You begin to understand that self-respect is not loud in the way the world often defines loudness. It does not need to argue or prove itself. It stands firm, steady, and unshaken, like a tree that has weathered too many storms to bend for every passing wind. You no longer feel the need to explain your boundaries to those who refuse to understand them. You no longer shrink your light to make someone else feel taller. There is a calm strength in you now, one that chooses dignity over approval, truth over temporary acceptance. Fear does not disappear, but it loses its authority. It becomes a whisper instead of a command. You may still feel it when you speak honestly, when you choose differently, when you walk away from what no longer aligns, but it no longer controls your steps. You have learned that fear often guards the very doors you are meant to walk through, and self-respect is the key that allows you to open them anyway. There is a freedom in no longer betraying yourself, in saying what you mean, in honoring what you feel, in standing where you once would have folded. It changes the way you carry yourself, the way you connect with others, the way you see your own worth. You begin to attract people and experiences that meet you at your truth, rather than those that require your silence. And so, by this age, you stop asking, will they accept me? And start asking, do I accept myself here? That question alone reshapes your life. Because when self-respect becomes louder than fear, you no longer live to be tolerated. You live to be true. And in that truth, there is a power so steady, so undeniable, that it changes everything. There was a time when you believed healing would arrive like a sudden sunrise, bright, complete, and final. You thought one day you would wake up and feel untouched by what once hurt you, as if pain could be erased rather than remembered. But life does not move in straight lines, and neither does the heart. It circles back, revisits old places, and sometimes asks you to face what you thought you had already overcome. There are days when you feel strong, steady, certain that you have made peace with your past. And then, without warning, a memory returns, a feeling rises, and it seems as though you are standing in the same place all over again. In those moments, it is easy to believe that you have failed, that you have not grown, that healing has somehow passed you by. But what you come to understand, with time and patience, is that returning does not mean remaining. Feeling again does not mean you are still broken. By the time you reach 45, you begin to see healing for what it truly is, not a destination, but a decision you make over and over again. It is in the way you speak to yourself when no one else is listening. It is in the boundaries you choose to keep, even when it is difficult. It is in the quiet moments when you resist the urge to reopen wounds just to make sense of them again. You learn that some pain does not need to be revisited to be understood. It needs to be released to be outgrown. There is a gentle strength in choosing yourself, especially on the days when it feels unfamiliar. It means no longer chasing closure from those who cannot give it, no longer seeking validation from places that once made you question your worth. It means allowing yourself to rest from the constant need to fix everything, to explain everything, to carry everything. You begin to trust that healing is happening, even when it is not visible, even when it is slow. You start to notice the quiet changes, the way certain things no longer trigger the same reaction, the way you recover more quickly, the way your peace returns sooner than it once did. These are not small victories. They are evidence of your growth. They are reminders that even though the path has not been straight, it has still been forward. And somewhere along this journey, you make peace with the fact that scars may remain, but they no longer define you. They become part of your story, not the whole of it. By this age, you understand that healing is not about becoming untouched. It is about becoming whole in spite of what you have been through. And when you continue to choose yourself again and again, even in the smallest ways, you realize something powerful. Healing was never something you had to chase. It was something you were building all along. There was a time when you believed that love, friendship, and connection were things you had to earn through effort, through proving, through giving more, through staying longer than you should have. You chased conversations that felt one-sided, held on to people who gave you just enough to keep you hoping, and convinced yourself that if you tried harder, showed up better, or loved deeper, things would finally feel balanced. But somewhere in that constant reaching, you lost the quiet ease that connection is meant to carry. You begin to see, with time, that anything requiring you to chase it endlessly is already moving away from you. By the time you reach 45, that realization settles deeply into your bones. You no longer find pride in overextending yourself for people who cannot meet you halfway. You no longer romanticize inconsistency or call it mystery. What once felt like passion begins to reveal itself as exhaustion, and what you once called loyalty begins to look more like self-neglect. There is a shift that happens, subtle but powerful, when you stop running after what does not choose you. It is not that you become distant or cold, it is that you become aligned. You begin to stand still in your truth and allow what is meant for you to come forward without force. You start to understand that real connection does not require constant convincing. It does not leave you questioning your place or your worth. It meets you naturally and willingly, without the need for pursuit. Peace enters your life not as something you find, but as something that arrives when you stop disturbing your own spirit. When you no longer chase, you create space. Space for clarity, space for rest, space for people who recognize your value without needing to be reminded. You begin to notice how different it feels, how light it is to be around those who show up without hesitation, who give without keeping score, who stay without being asked. And in that space, you also meet yourself again. The version of you that is not tired from trying, not weighed down by uncertainty, not stretched thin by uneven effort. You rediscover what it feels like to be at ease in your own presence, to trust that you are enough without needing to prove it to anyone. That kind of peace is not loud, but it is undeniable. It settles into your life in a way that feels both new and familiar, as if it had been waiting for you all along. By this age, you no longer measure connection by intensity, but by consistency. You no longer confuse effort with love or attention with care. You understand that what is real does not need to be chased, it needs to be received. And so, you let go of the habit of pursuit and embrace the power of presence. Because when you stop chasing people, you do not end up alone, you end up at peace. And that peace begins to attract everything that truly belongs in your life. There was a time when you felt something deep within you, quiet, persistent, almost like a whisper, but you learned to ignore it. You called it doubt, overthinking, even fear. You placed more trust in the voices around you than the one within you, believing that others must know better, that logic must always outweigh feeling. And so you silenced that inner knowing, even when it tried to warn you, even when it tried to guide you away from what was not meant for you. But life has a way of repeating its lessons until they are finally understood. The moments you overlooked, the choices that did not sit right in your spirit, the paths that left you feeling unsettled, they begin to form a pattern. And with time, you start to see it clearly. That voice you dismissed was never trying to confuse you. It was trying to protect you. It saw what you could not yet admit, felt what you were not yet ready to face. By the time you reach 45, you begin to listen differently. Not with urgency, not with fear, but with a quiet respect for the wisdom that has always lived inside you. Your intuition no longer feels like a distant murmur. It becomes steady, familiar, and undeniable. It shows up in the way your body responds, in the unease that lingers without explanation, in the calm certainty that requires no proof. And you begin to trust it, not because it is loud, but because it is consistent. You stop asking for endless opinions, stop seeking validation for what your spirit has already confirmed. There is a deep knowing that settles within you, one that does not need to argue or justify itself. It simply is. You recognize that not everything can be explained with logic, and not everything should be. Some truths are meant to be felt, understood without words, honored without question. There is a courage in following your intuition, especially when it leads you away from what is familiar. It may ask you to walk alone at times, to choose differently than others expect, to trust a path that has not yet revealed its outcome. But by now, you have learned that the cost of ignoring it is far greater than the risk of trusting it. You have felt what it means to betray yourself, and you have no desire to return to that place. And so you begin to move through life with a quiet confidence, guided not by noise, but by knowing. You listen when something feels right, and you honor it when something does not. You no longer need every answer before taking a step. You trust that the direction itself is enough. By this age, your intuition is no longer something you question, it is something you follow, because you finally understand that the voice you once ignored was never leading you astray, it was leading you home. There was a time when you believed that a meaningful life had to be seen to be real. You measured your progress by applause, your worth by recognition, your happiness by how many people noticed it. You thought success had a sound, loud, undeniable, impossible to ignore. And so, you moved through life trying to make noise, trying to prove that you were doing enough, becoming enough, living enough. But even in those moments of validation, something within you remained unsettled, as if the approval you received could not quite reach the place where you needed it most. As the years pass, you begin to notice a different kind of life unfolding around you. It is not loud, not performative, not seeking attention. It exists in quiet mornings, in honest conversations, in the steady rhythm of a life lived with intention rather than display. By the time you reach 45, you start to understand that meaning does not announce itself. It reveals itself in the smallest, most unassuming moments. And those moments, though easily overlooked, carry a depth that no spotlight could ever provide. You begin to loosen your grip on the need to be seen, not because you no longer matter, but because you finally understand that your value was never dependent on an audience. You no longer feel the urge to explain your choices to those who do not walk your path. You no longer shape your life into something presentable just to feel accepted. There is a quiet confidence that replaces all of that, a knowing that what you are building does not need to be displayed to be real. There is a certain peace that comes with living quietly. It allows you to hear yourself again, to recognize what truly fulfills you without the noise of expectation. You begin to choose things not because they will impress others, but because they resonate with you. Your joy becomes more personal, more grounded, less dependent on how it is received. And in that shift, life starts to feel less like a performance and more like a presence. You notice how the most meaningful parts of your life are often the ones no one else sees. The growth that happens in solitude, the strength it takes to walk away, the discipline of staying true to yourself when it would be easier not to, these things do not come with applause, yet they shape you in the deepest ways. They become the foundation of a life that feels whole, even in its quietness. And so you stop chasing validation from the world because you have found something far more steady within yourself. You learn that not everything needs to be shared, not everything needs to be understood by others to hold value. By this age, you realize that a meaningful life is not measured by how loudly it is lived, but by how deeply it is felt. And in that understanding, you find a kind of fulfillment that no amount of recognition could ever replace, a quiet, unshakable sense that you are exactly where you are meant to be. There was a time when silence felt like weakness to you, when you believed that every slight required a defense, every misunderstanding needed correction, every insult demanded a reply. You carried words like armor, ready to prove, to explain, to protect your name in every room you entered. You thought strength was found in how loudly you could speak, how quickly you could respond, how firmly you could stand your ground. But in all that noise, you often left feeling more drained than victorious, as though you had spent pieces of yourself on battles that never truly mattered. Life, in its quiet persistence, begins to show you something different. Not all conflicts are meant to be resolved, and not all voices deserve access to your energy. By the time you reach 45, you start to recognize the cost of constant reaction. You see how easily your peace can be disturbed when you give your attention to everything that calls for it. And slowly, almost without noticing, you begin to choose your responses more carefully, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. Silence, once uncomfortable, becomes a place of power. It is no longer empty or uncertain. It is intentional, steady, and self-assured. You learn that not every accusation deserves your explanation, and not every opinion deserves your acknowledgement. Some words are better left unanswered, not because you have nothing to say, but because you have learned that your peace is more valuable than proving a point. There is a strength in restraint that you did not understand before. It takes far more courage to walk away than to engage, to remain grounded when provoked, to hold your dignity when others attempt to disrupt it. You begin to see that reacting to everything is not a sign of confidence, it is a sign of being easily moved. And you are no longer willing to be shaken by every passing storm. This does not mean you lose your voice. On the contrary, your voice becomes more powerful because it is no longer wasted. When you do choose to speak, it carries intention, clarity, and purpose. It is no longer driven by impulse, but guided by understanding. And because of that, it is heard in a way it never was before. You also come to understand that silence is not always about others, it is about yourself. It is the space where you gather your thoughts, where you listen more deeply, where you protect your inner world from unnecessary noise. In that silence, you find clarity. You begin to see situations for what they truly are, without the distortion of emotion or urgency. And so, you no longer feel the need to attend every argument you are invited to. You no longer feel obligated to correct every misunderstanding or defend every truth you carry. By this age, you understand that your energy is sacred, and where you place it shapes your life. Silence becomes your boundary, your protection, your quiet declaration that not everything deserves a piece of you. In that choice, there is a profound kind of freedom, because when you stop responding to everything, you start living with intention. And in that stillness, you discover a strength that does not need to announce itself. It simply is.